Arnold Schwarzenegger has spent 60 years being described as the strongest man in every room he entered. 7 Mr. Olympia titles, a 710-pound deadlift, a physique built through sheer force of will, engineered to be the most dominant anyone had put on a bodybuilding stage. For most of his life, he has stated that there was one man he could never beat in a straight test of strength. A man 5 inches shorter and 30 pounds lighter than him. That man was Franco Columbu. Arnold did not simply acknowledge that Franco was stronger. He said so on stage, in interviews, in his own memoir, and again decades later, standing before a live crowd at his own Arnold Classic. Not one of the strongest. Not strong for his size. The strongest man Arnold Schwarzenegger ever knew. This is the story of why, told largely in Arnold's own words and through the moments the two men shared over more than 50 years, before Franco Columbu ever stood beside Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was a small, thin boy in a mountain village called Olympia in the interior of Sardinia. His parents were shepherds, money was scarce, and life was difficult in the way rural post-war Italy was difficult for most people. Franco was short for his age, and other children noticed. He was drawn into frequent fights and lost most of them. By his own account, that pattern continued until he was around 11 years old. At that point, something changed. He decided he was no longer willing to be the one who got hit, and he began fighting back. Word spread quickly that the smallest boy in the village was no longer an easy target. That refusal to be underestimated because of his size became the defining thread of his life. He channeled it first into boxing, working through 30 fights before deciding the sport was too hard on his face and head. He then left boxing and took up weightlifting instead. Boxing had taught him something that would matter for the rest of his life: how to generate real, explosive force from a small frame. Boxers do not win by being the biggest person in the ring. They win by knowing how to move their weight, brace their core, and transfer power through the whole body in a single instant. That kind of full-body force production is a different skill from simply building large muscles, and it was a skill Franco carried directly into weightlifting, where it showed up as explosive power on the platform that his size alone would not have predicted. By the mid-1960s, Franco was still barely 5'5", but he had rebuilt himself into a dense, powerful frame through sustained, demanding training, moving from the boxing gym into serious competitive lifting. That transformation eventually placed him in the same room as a teenage Austrian bodybuilder who was already being discussed as the future of the sport. It happened at a bodybuilding competition in Stuttgart, Germany, in 1965. Arnold was 18. He was already enormous for his age, already obsessed, and already convinced he was going to be the greatest bodybuilder who ever lived. Standing across from him was a bricklayer's son who came up to his shoulder. By every normal logic of competitive sport, they should have become rivals. Bodybuilding, especially in that era, ran on ego and one-upmanship. Instead, something else happened. Arnold and Franco recognized something in each other, the same relentlessness, the same refusal to be told their bodies had limits, and they became close, fast. When Arnold's opportunity came to move to America and train under bodybuilding promoter Joe Weider, he didn't go alone. He made sure Franco came with him. Weider agreed to sponsor both of them, putting them up and giving them a modest weekly stipend to live on while they trained. That stipend barely covered rent, let alone the grocery bills that came with feeding 2 bodybuilders worth of muscle. What happened next shaped both of their futures, on the gym floor and off it. Before either of them was famous, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Franco Columbu were laying bricks for a living. Weider's stipend wasn't enough to survive on in California, so in 1969 the two of them started a bricklaying and patio construction business together, called European Brickworks. During the day they built patios and walkways for paying customers. In the evenings they trained. It was physical labor stacked directly on top of physical training, the kind of grind that either breaks a friendship or cements it permanently. For Arnold and Franco, it cemented it. They weren't just training partners chasing the same trophies anymore. They were two immigrants with almost nothing, building a life with their hands, relying on each other to make rent. That shared struggle is part of why what came next mattered so much. Because when Arnold talks about Franco's strength, he isn't talking about a stranger he admired from a distance. He's talking about someone who was in the trenches with him, literally laying bricks for years. Franco wasn't just physically stronger than Arnold in raw numbers. By Arnold's own account, he was also the more disciplined training partner, and that discipline is something Arnold has openly credited as part of what made him a champion. There's a story that's become something of a legend among old-school bodybuilding fans, told from Franco's side. The two of them were doing sets of squats at 405 pounds, 10 reps each. Franco finished his set and stepped away to get water, only to come back and find that Arnold had cut his own set short, doing 8 reps instead of 10. Franco called him out on it immediately, told him he'd seen it happen in the gym mirror, and made him start the set over from scratch. Franco later said flatly that he wasn't sure he would have won Mr. Olympia without that kind of discipline pushing him. The arrangement worked both ways. Arnold has said Franco was simply his favorite training partner, describing him decades later as still holding that title in the present tense, not just as a nostalgic memory of back then. That was the environment the two of them trained in for years. total honesty, zero tolerance for cutting corners, and an unspoken competition to never be the one who backed down first. It was also the environment that produced the numbers in the next section. Numbers that, by Arnold's own account, tilted heavily in Franco's favor. Franco Columbu wasn't just a bodybuilder built for the stage. Before he ever touched a posing trophy, he was a competitive powerlifter, and he kept lifting competitively even after bodybuilding made him famous. In his own memoir years later, Arnold made an admission that still surprises people who only know him as the Terminator. He wrote that on squats specifically, Franco was simply the stronger man between the two of them. Franco could rep 500 pounds for 10 reps, while Arnold could only manage 6 at that same weight. That was not a small gap. It was a different category of leg strength, coming from a man who weighed dramatically less than Arnold did. The picture becomes even more lopsided when you line up their best competitive lifts. Franco's claimed career numbers include a squat in the range of 655 pounds, a bench press as high as 525 pounds, and a deadlift reported at 750 pounds, all put up by a man competing at roughly 185 pounds of body weight. Arnold, at a body weight of around 220 and with a frame built more for symmetry and mass than pure powerlifting, put up a 545-pound squat, a 500-pound bench, and a 710-pound deadlift of his own, genuinely elite numbers on their own, and still not enough to catch Franco pound for pound. Some of Franco's individual claim numbers, particularly on the bench press, have been disputed by bodybuilding historians over the years. Some who have researched his career suggest a couple of his most eye-popping claims may have been closer to posed photo ops than verified competition lifts. But even the more conservative verified figures still place him among the strongest pound-for-pound lifters bodybuilding has ever produced, and Arnold never once tried to argue the comparison in his own favor. Arnold said it publicly, more than once, in exactly these words: "Franco was pound-for-pound stronger than me." This was a man who built an empire out of being the biggest, strongest figure on any stage in the world, handing that specific title to someone who came up to his shoulder. It wasn't just the barbell numbers. Franco did things in gyms and on stages that had nothing to do with competition lifts and everything to do with raw, almost cartoonish power. He could bend steel bars with his bare hands. He would blow up rubber hot water bottles until they burst, just to demonstrate the sheer force of his lungs and grip. On more than one occasion, he took a bent steel bar, straightened it by hand, and then for good measure, did it again, gripping the bar between his teeth. Fellow competitors who watched this in person walked away rattled. One bodybuilder who saw Franco perform at a competition in Australia later described him as the strongest man he had ever seen, recalling the image of Franco bending a steel bar into a horseshoe shape and then straightening it out again using nothing but his jaw. Arnold saw versions of this up close, for decades, not as a spectator but as a training partner standing right next to him. In 2019, at his own Arnold Classic weekend, in front of a live crowd, Arnold said it again, without hedging. Franco Columbu was the strongest man he ever knew. Not the strongest bodybuilder, not the strongest man he had competed against on a bodybuilding stage. The strongest man, period, that Arnold Schwarzenegger, a 7-time Mr. Olympia who had trained and competed alongside virtually every legendary strongman of his era, had ever met in his entire life. That is not a passing compliment. It is a title Arnold gave to exactly one person, and never took back. To understand how unusual Franco's strength-to-size ratio was, it helps to compare him with the bodybuilders who came after him. Men who trained with modern nutrition science, modern equipment, and in some cases simply larger genetics to work with. Ronnie Coleman, an 8-time Mr. Olympia, widely considered one of the strongest competitive bodybuilders who ever lived, was recorded benching 495 pounds for 5 reps while training for the Olympia. Jay Cutler, another Mr. Olympia champion, recorded a best bench of 550 pounds for 2 reps. Both men competed at body weights well north of 250 pounds, 60, 70, even 80 pounds heavier than Franco ever weighed in his career. Franco's claimed lifts, on a body weight of around 185 to 189 pounds, work out to some of the highest strength to body weight scores of any Mr. Olympia winner in history, by measures powerlifters use to compare athletes of different sizes, such as the Wilks and Dots scoring systems. Even setting aside his most disputed individual numbers, his verified totals still place him in that same elite tier. That's the context that makes Arnold's comments land so hard. He wasn't comparing Franco to an average gym goer. He was comparing him implicitly to the entire lineage of Mr. Olympia champions who followed both of them, men with every modern advantage, and still pound for pound, nobody quite matched what Franco was doing on a bodyweight that would look almost small on a modern Olympia stage. In 1977, Franco decided to test himself against a completely different category of athlete. He entered the very first World's Strongest Man competition, a contest built for men who dwarfed him. The other finalists outweighed him by, in some cases, over 100 pounds. On paper, it should have been a mismatch. Franco didn't just survive the competition, he competed in it seriously. He finished in the top 2 or 3 in events like the bar bending contest, the wrist rolling competition, and a car deadlift. Then came the refrigerator carry, an event where competitors strapped an actual refrigerator to their backs and raced across a course. Mid-race, Franco suffered a serious leg injury that effectively ended his run in the competition. He still finished 5th overall, against a field of men who, by pure size alone, had no business being in the same category as a 185-pound bodybuilder. It remains one of the clearest demonstrations of what Arnold meant when he called Franco pound for pound the strongest man he'd ever known. Put him next to genuine giants, take away the size advantage entirely, and he was still standing near the top of the leaderboard. Franco's strength didn't stay contained to the gym with Arnold. It eventually made its way to Hollywood. When Sylvester Stallone needed to look like a credible physical threat for one of the Rocky sequels, it was Franco who trained him, reportedly helping Stallone add several kilograms of lean muscle in just a few weeks of focused work. Stallone never forgot the favor. Years later, when Franco died, Stallone stated publicly that Franco was the greatest, strongest bodybuilder he had ever met, and that there would never be another man like him. Arnold and Franco went on to share the screen themselves in several films, most notably appearing together in Conan the Barbarian and The Terminator, with Franco also taking a starring role of his own in the action film Beretta's Island. Off-camera, the training dynamic between them never really changed. Franco was still the one pushing Arnold through the 2 reps he didn't think he had left, the same discipline that, by Arnold's own account, helped shape him into a champion in the first place. The strength and the discipline were only part of what made Franco irreplaceable to Arnold. When Arnold married Maria Shriver in 1986, Franco stood beside him as his best man, and later became godfather to one of their children. This wasn't a professional colleague showing up for a photo. This was 50 years of shared bricklaying jobs, shared gym sessions, and shared meals, culminating in the kind of trust reserved for actual family. Franco's life after competitive bodybuilding kept expanding as well. He became a licensed chiropractor, wrote a series of fitness books and a memoir, and stayed connected to the sport that made him famous. In 2006, then-Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed him to the California Board of Chiropractic Examiners. 3 years later, Franco received the Arnold Classic Lifetime Achievement Award, an honor handed out at the very event Arnold had built in his own name. Through all of it, Arnold kept saying the same thing whenever anyone asked him about Franco, that he was his favorite training partner, then and still, decades after they had first met as 2 young bodybuilders on a stage in Germany. On August 2019, while visiting his home region of Sardinia, Franco Columbu fell ill while swimming in the ocean off the coast near San Teodoro. He was taken to a hospital in nearby Olympia, where he died at age 78, just over 3 weeks after his birthday. Arnold's response was immediate and personal. He wrote that from the moment they met in Munich, Franco had been his partner in crime, and that his life had been more fun, more colorful, and more complete because of him. He said a part of Franco would live on in him, in his family, and in the millions of people Franco had inspired throughout his life. He called him, simply, his best friend. 54 years after a teenage Arnold Schwarzenegger stood across from a bricklayer's son from Sardinia at a competition in Germany, he was still saying the same thing he had said the whole time, that Franco Columbu was stronger than him, closer to him, and more essential to his own story than almost anyone else in it. It would have been easy for Arnold Schwarzenegger to spend his career making sure everyone remembered him as the strongest man alive. He had every incentive to do it. The fame, the movie career, the political career, all of it was built on that image. Instead, for 60 straight years, from a bricklaying job in 1969 to a stage at his own Arnold Classic in 2019 to a heartfelt tribute written the week Franco died, he kept pointing at a 5'5" kid from a Sardinian shepherd family, and telling anyone who would listen that he was the one who could really lift. That may be the real lesson in this story. The men who are actually secure in their own strength are usually the ones most willing to admit, in public and on the record, again and again, when someone else has more of it.